Jazz, the Mammoth, and the Utes, Cougars, and Aggies. When it comes to sports in Utah, we've got you covered. This is Scotty G and the coach, Tim LeComb, presented by Mountain Land Supply on 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone.
97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. Scott Gerard, the coach, Tim LeComb. Hope you're having a tremendous Wednesday. Time to talk a little college football. Dan Wolken, kind enough to hang out with us from Yahoo Sports. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Good. So is our congressional bill, is it on life support? Does it have a pulse? If it was in the ambulance, what condition would it be in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to hang on every word that's coming out of the congressional staffers, and certainly a lot of my colleagues are in regular communication, getting sort of the minute-by-minute updates. I'm more of a tell me when you have the baby, because I don't really trust, deadlines create pressure for sure, but they also create a lot of fake urgency. It is true that the Senate is going on recess soon, and so, if they don't get it done, it creates a whole domino effect of timing issues, and obviously the election in November is one where, you really, as you get closer to that, it's really difficult. So they feel like they're under a time commitment. The SEC and the Big Ten have been stringing it along. I don't really know, what's going to happen. And even if they do get it on the floor, and even if they vote for it in the Senate, then it's got to go to the House. And I don't know. I try to be a little removed from all the machinations of it.
Dan, you've been doing this a long time, and we've been talking about this era that we've been in the last few years, and just trying to figure out a way to get out of it and kind of stabilize things. What do you feel like the ultimate end game is here? I mean, do you feel like it's inevitable we're headed toward a major big super conference that the big players kind of dictate? Or do you feel like, college football can survive as it is?
Well, it's a really complicated question because it depends so much on what happens in the media rights part of the business. And it's really unpredictable because every 5-6 years things change so much. And you look at 2030, that's kind of a year people have circled where some of the big deals start to come up for renegotiation, So the Big Ten and the SEC, if you look at the last 2 times they've been through TV rights negotiations, that's when they've expanded, because expansion drives more value, drives more money. And you look at what's happening in the congressional bill right now, and there's been a lot of concern with the SEC and the Big Ten about a provision in the bill that limits their ability to expand. So that's been sort of one of the big issues that they've had. So I don't know where all that's going to come out in the wash. I don't think anything's inevitable, but I do think at some point in the future, and it may be, after we're all retired and not doing this anymore, I don't really know. The biggest brands in college sports and college football are going to look at the lesser brands they're in the conferences with and say, why are we sharing the money with you? We're Ohio State. Why should we be subsidizing Purdue's value? That kind of thing. And maybe they do join up and there's a 40-team league or whatever. I don't know. I just know media rights and television money dictate so much of it.
So when you have a guy like, and I call games for Utah State, so I've been around Josh Pastner a little bit over the last year, and the dude is Barnum and Bailey. Like, I love him. I love interviewing him because that dude is a salesman. He's always in sales mode. And what he said about UNLV being for sale, and I know that they had to walk it back a little bit, but what he said, if you just listen to what he said, he's not that far off, and it's not that bad of an idea. I actually kind of applaud the way he, put him and his university and his basketball team out there.
Yeah, well, I think everybody understood when he said that, or at least everybody who follows college sports super close, that when he said buy a team, he wasn't literally saying we're selling UNLV basketball to the highest bidder. He's talking about they need a sugar daddy. They need somebody to come in and write them a big check so they can get players. And everybody's in that position. And if you have one person who does that, one person who's capable of, for a program at UNLV's level, spending $10 to $12 million on a roster, well, that person is essentially the owner. They're the de facto owner, and they're going to have a say in a lot of the decisions. They're going to be sitting front row. They're going to be, in that space. And you come to find out, because I talked to Josh on Monday, there's a lot of people who have a lot of money who would love to be in that position, because I don't know if it's ego. I don't know if they expect some kind of return on investment. But there's a lot of people who, maybe they can't quite afford to get in the game, or they, for whatever reason, it's not like you can just go buy an NBA team or whatever. Like it's hard to do. But, if you can go stroke a check for $15 million and sort of be the main guy who's in charge of one of these college programs, maybe that's just something you really enjoy, a really fun and expensive hobby for somebody who's got way more money than they could spend.
Dan, do you think the expanded playoff has made the regular season more interesting, or do you think it's diminished some of the urgency that we were used to every Saturday?
Well, I think so far it hasn't really diminished it very much at 12. I don't know what would happen if we go to 24. And I do think, there's a number where it does start to impact how people look at the regular season, how we talk about the regular season, maybe even how some teams approach the regular season. And like, for instance, if you go to 24, some of these games that hit, like Ohio State, Michigan, just as an example, that's always been Thanksgiving, right? The Saturday after Thanksgiving. Well, in a 2014 playoff era, you really have to think, is that game best positioned at the end of the season when, often both teams would already be, in the playoffs or have clinched their playoff berth? Or would you rather play a game like that early when it feels like it has more meaning? That's just one example of the kind of maybe reimagining of the regular season that I think would have to happen if it goes to 24, because realistically, just so many games are not going to have the same punch that they do now at 12.
Looking at actual football games and actual football season coming up, the Sorsby thing, I don't know if anybody really anticipated that he'd play before the judge then said he could. And then, of course, obviously that thing went away. But Texas Tech was considered to be the forefront of the Big 12, especially if Sorsby was playing. Now that he's not, and everybody's kind of waiting on Will Hammond to see how well he'll perform and how healthy he is at the start of the season. Where would you put BYU as your number one in the Big 12, or still keep Texas Tech there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that Texas Tech, especially on defense, is going to be quite as robust as they were a year ago when they were really, really very good.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, their talent was unbelievable on that side of the ball. I think they're probably downgraded a bit there. The quarterback situation, I just don't know. We've seen a little bit of Hammond, not enough for me to make a definitive statement about what anybody should expect, although I do think they're comfortable with him as the starter. And, I was maybe not quite as high individually on Sorsby as some other people. So I'd maybe default a little bit to Texas Tech. I just have a hard time these days getting my arms around what to expect from almost any team because of the transfer portal and the newness that you tend to get. I mean, yeah, there's some carryover year to year, but it just really feels like everything's up for grabs. And, you look a couple years ago, just as an example, in the Big 12, Arizona State comes out of absolute nowhere to win the conference. Nobody saw it coming, but they did a great job in the portal. And there's always going to be teams like that, that especially in a league like the Big 12 where, maybe the high end is not dominant. It's maybe a little bit more parity in that league, like you could see some crazy results. And so, yeah, I mean, BYU, Texas Tech, you put them in the bucket up top with maybe a couple other teams. I do think Arizona State's got a chance to be good. Arizona should be good again. But, yeah, I don't know that Sorsby is a total game changer for me.
Obviously, around here, we got used to rinse, repeat. Kyle Whittingham at Utah, 21 years, loaded the team up and go do it. And we've got a new coach here, and obviously Kyle's got a new job. Comments on, I guess, first Utah, your thoughts on Utah with Morgan Scalley taking over, and then, what you've seen and heard from Kyle Whittingham out there at Michigan thus far.
Well, I would say to start with, the overriding thing about Utah is it's just going to be strange, I think, to experience Utah without Kyle on the sideline. And he'd been there for so long, and certainly for me, almost my whole time in the business, really. I mean, I remember covering a game during Urban's, last year there when I was really, really young, and now I'm not so young anymore. So
join the club, dude. It happens.
Yeah, and Kyle's been there the whole time, right? So it's kind of weird. Obviously, Utah's got a lot of confidence in Morgan Scalley. I mean, we'll see, right? This guy's never been a head coach before, so hard to predict. But interesting times in Utah. A lot of changes. The private equity piece that's kind of transforming the department. Like They're on the radar for a lot of different reasons at this point. And then as far as Kyle, I haven't heard much, really. I mean, it's been quiet. There's been a lot of other things going on in Michigan over the last few months. And really, he's probably, kind of enjoyed laying low a little bit. I think they've sort of been the beneficiary of not having the spotlight specifically on football. Now, obviously, that starts to change. Because we're at Big Ten Media Days, or I'm not physically there, but that's the point in the calendar this week, and so we'll have more expectation on Michigan and sort of what to think. But I thought it was a good move overall by Michigan to kind of bring in a steady, experienced guy. I don't necessarily expect him to be in the job for 7-8 years or anything like that, but why would Kyle Whittingham not do a good job in Michigan? It would shock me.
So, Dan, I mentioned my connection to Utah State. They're part of this newfangled Pac-12, which is, essentially Mountain West 2.0. And I've been talking to a lot of guys, New Mexico, UNLV, guys that stayed put. And the thought is, it's like, okay, we're going to go through the motions on this, but ultimately we're probably all going to be together again here very soon. In this whole reshuffling thing that I think we all anticipate 2030, 2031, do you feel like we're going to, at least a little bit of common sense will prevail and we'll get a little bit back to more geographical sense?
Common sense in college sports. That's a tough bet to make.
I know.
I think you've heard more coming out lately as people have tried to reimagine and rethink what college sports should look like to try to get back to a semblance of normalcy. You have heard a lot more about geographically based conferences for non-revenue sports, kind of decoupling everything from football, which honestly would be great. There's no reason why volleyball teams and softball teams and, in these mega conferences where everybody should be flying 3 time zones. That doesn't make a lot of sense for sports that don't really make a lot of money. I don't know where it's all going to lead. I thought the Pac-12 raiding the Mountain West and kind of only taking the parts they wanted. I mean, I thought it was kind of silly, to be honest with you, because it's basically just the Mountain West, right? Yeah. It's the Mountain West with Washington State and Oregon State. So what have you really accomplished? There's not been very good transparency on the media deals, to figure out if it's really significantly more money for these schools. So we don't really know that yet. I don't know. I honestly believe a lot of administrators at a school like Utah State, and a lot of these Mountain West schools looked at it like a branding thing.
Yes,
like going to the
100%.
Pac-12 is better for branding because people remember the Pac-12 as from the way it was. I don't necessarily believe that. I think people look at the collection of schools and say it's the same. So good luck, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know what to say. Like, just good luck, right?
Well, no, I wasn't necessarily talking about just, the Mountain West in general, but, you feel like there is kind of this surge, and maybe it's just me wishful thinking that, we get back to UCLA and USC not playing in Rutgers, something that makes a little bit more sense.
Well,
but you're right. Common sense doesn't seem to reign supreme these days.
Well, like USC and UCLA are not going back to the Pac-12. Like,
no. I get that.
You know what I mean? So maybe if the Big Ten expands, like they bring in a Stanford or whatever to try to, balance it a little bit more geographically. But I just think, like, with these mega conferences, the hay's kind of out of the barn, and like they're going to be what they are for the most part. And it's stupid to have these conferences going all the way across the country, but this is the result of bad planning, bad leadership, greed. Like, you can just throw every bad thing in there, and we sort of end up with this Frankenstein system.
The fact that a Tennessee player has to miss the first two games because of a $490 flight, it almost feels like the NCAA is like, hey, we're still here. We can still do things. And they're taking it out on this dude for, probably a Southwest flight paid by his agent, which just, that Coach mentioned earlier in the show, like, this is why we are where we're at today, is because of dumb things like this.
Well, I saw that headline, and I was thinking, like, did I just wake up in a time machine to go back to 2012?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing you would see regularly back then. Somebody, a guy named Gene Marsh, who was on the Committee on Infractions for quite a long time, he always had a great analogy that NCAA enforcement is, it's like Goldilocks. The pudding is either a little bit, too hot, or it's a little too cold, and it's never quite just right. And that has always kind of been the case with the NCAA and some of these punishments. They've been so, they got bullied into not enforcing any rules for the last several years. And now they maybe feel like they can enforce some rules, so maybe they're going over the top again, and the pendulum's swinging back to, the porridge is too hot. That's my only explanation, because it does not seem like the punishment fits the crime, given the context of what's going on in the real world of college athletics right now.
So back to the field, is there a team that is either being talked about a bunch or not talked about enough that you got your eye on for the upcoming season?
Interesting question. I was just at SEC Media Days last week, and I was kind of taken aback by just how little buzz there was around Alabama. I remember back in the day, you would go cover SEC Media Days, and Alabama Day was, there was a little extra energy in the air, and, it always felt big. And Kalen DeBoer has kind of made it feel small, and not because he's a bad coach or whatever, but he's more like low key, and he's not the big personality. And his first 2 years they've been okay, and last year they kind of stumble into the playoffs. And so I'm just curious, like, what is Alabama football now, and what's it going to be going forward? And is Kalen DeBoer the guy? And like all of these things, and I feel like this is it's a big year in terms of trajectory and the way fans are going to react to him. And obviously he just got a contract extension, and the school's trying to protect him from the pressure of all that. But it can take on a life of its own. Like, it's going to be really interesting to see, because I don't know what to expect from them.
Mm. Well, Dan, appreciate your time. Good stuff as always. Looking forward to catching up with you down the line.
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
You got it, Dan Wolken. He does a tremendous job at Yahoo Sports.